all of this political stuff that we're going through, the recalls, the tariffs, all this constant churn of attention-grabbing things means that the really deep problems aren't getting solved.
Hello and welcome to Perspectives with Neilo. I'm your host, Neilo Sullivan. Taiwan has been navigating a domestic political crisis in recent months, with partisan politics intensifying, cross-strait tensions rising, and US tariffs adding new pressure. To help make sense of it all, I sat down in Taichung with two of the sharpest minds covering Taiwan today. Courtney Donovan Smith is a staff columnist for the Taipei Times and Central Taiwan correspondent for ICRT. And Michael Turton is also a columnist for the Taipei Times and a veteran commentator who's been writing about Taiwan for over 30 years. We recorded this conversation on June 24th, diving deep into the Great Recall, President Lai's leadership, party dynamics, trade pressures, and what it all means for Taiwan's future. So it's great to be here in Taichung and to be joined by two special guests on the podcast today. First is Michael Turton. Michael, you're very welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And also we have Courtney Donovan Smith. Donovan, welcome back.
Hey, it's great to be back.
So maybe we could start with an article you wrote recently, Donovan, on one of your deep dives in the Taipei Times. And you said that this is a deeply unsettling period in Taiwan. There's a lot going on. Can you tell us a little bit about why you said that? Why is it a deeply unsettling time?
Well, I mean, there's obviously a lot going on. The Trump administration, they had their, quote, Liberation Day tariffs and then abruptly delayed them for 90 days. That's coming due in early July. Now, Taiwan has been trying to negotiate with the U.S. government, but the U.S. government appears to be prioritizing bigger countries, bigger markets, and countries with leaders that can actually appeal to Trump directly, which for obvious reasons President Lai can't. Now, the economics minister recently, just a few days ago, came out and pretty much admitted that they're not going anywhere and is hoping for more time. So there's that. Meanwhile, China has been facing a series of economic headwinds, and they now have massive industrial overcapacity. And they're losing a big chunk of the American market, which they've had some success at redirecting into other areas like Southeast Asia and all of the and the EU, but even BRICS countries like Brazil and Russia have started putting in trade barriers. The EU is talking about increasing them significantly, on top of what the U.S. has done. And right now, a lot of estimates suggest that China's manufacturing capacity is about a third of the world's in total. Official figures, if memory serves, suggest that domestic consumption could take about 14% of the world total, but nobody believes those numbers. So realistically, domestically, they can take up less than 10% of the world's total, so less than a third of what they're producing. So I expect that we're going to see more restrictions coming from the EU, Canada, Brazil's already done them. I expect the ASEAN countries are going to probably join in. And so there's already the Chinese economy is showing serious signs of a meltdown. And for key industries, for example, like electric cars, are massively overextended and in debt. And there's a lot of talk about a lot of those companies are going to go down. Now, this is economically bad news for Taiwan. Indirectly, very soon, the Trump tariffs are going to impact Taiwan. But the problem is that Taiwan's the export juggernaut that's China uses is basically fueled in good part by Taiwanese tools, machine tools, chips, and other components. So this can impact the Taiwanese economy quite a bit. There are strong rumors going around right now about internal instability in Beijing. There have been a string of purges at the top of the People's Liberation Army. There's talk, although it always happens in the summer around this time, that Xi Jinping may be losing his grip on power. They're rumors, and I want to emphasize that, but there's a little bit more to go on this year than the annual round, particularly considering all the purges. So there's a lot buffeting Taiwan. And then domestically we have the recalls, which, you have the KMT-controlled KMT and their allies, the TPP, controlling the legislature, and basically stretching the limits of the law and the Constitution to try and get as much power to their branch of government as possible. Simultaneously, the DPP, or I should say initially, civic groups counterattacked, and their pro-DPP civic groups counterattacked through a mass recall campaign, which is unprecedented at any world democracy. The Peruvians did this on the local level like 10, 15 years ago. So they're kind of stretching the limits of what the law was intended for. But they're also trying to change the balance of power and overturn the last election to restore a DPP majority in the legislature.
Okay, so many things going on. And President Lai is the man leading the country, Michael, at this time. He's got a lot of responsibility, a lot of things there on his shoulders. How's he bearing up? How's he handling all of that?
Lai, I think he's doing very well. He's a lot more combative than the previous president, who was a bureaucrat and who managed things behind the scenes, was very tight-lipped, rarely said anything shocking or radical.
No, she never said anything shocking or radical.
I think, but Lai's constrained by the power of the opposition parties control the legislature. So, I think you saw his speech the other day was featured in the international media. He just laid down the case for Taiwan sovereignty, and then today the mayor of Taichung, who's a KMT mayor, who's been trying to position herself as a centrist, came out with that's just his personal opinion, thus outing herself as a standard mainlander ideologue. So,
yeah, that was an incredible statement that she made.
Yes, she was. Taiwan's never been controlled by the CCP. That's your personal opinion, Mr. President. But the point is that Lai is very different from Tsai, and yet he is also accomplishing good things.
And actually, if I can add one detail, I actually am surprised by his restraint. I mean, he's been under tremendous pressure. He hasn't lost his temper. He hasn't reacted in any knee-jerk fashion. He has upheld the Constitution and promulgated laws that the opposition put in specifically to hobble his government in the Constitutional Court. He used all constitutional methods and legal methods to slow that down and to try and get it reviewed. But at the end of the day, he's always signed off as he's legally required to do. And so, while Mike is absolutely correct in his assumption, his analysis, that he's been a little bit more direct on things like we need to be more assertive in national security, and developing, for example, a civilian defense and hardening ourselves against Chinese propaganda in the United Front. I do think that, and as Mike noted, he is also constrained, but he's been, I think, very careful, very calm, very deliberate, and I'd say restrained.
He's an experienced politician who's never lost an election.
Yeah.
And he's been in the legislature, so he knows.
Mm-hmm.
unlike Tsai.
Yeah.
And he just embarked on this Uniting the Country tour, a 10-stop speech tour he's going to give. Of course, the opposition party are going to criticize it, that it's badly timed in relation to these upcoming recall elections and so on. What do you think he's thinking when he embarks on a tour like that?
I think he's thinking it's going to help the recall. But I think it's good to the president. The problem is that Taipei tends to view the rest of Taiwan as a colony or as an appendage, and so it's good that Lai is like going around showing his face. That's an important thing that the president has to do.
Yeah. So in relation to this recall, then, just to talk about it a little more, I went to the KMT anti-recall rally on Saturday, which was in Taipei at that Rongxing Gardens.
I feel for you. I'm sorry to hear that.
It was an experience, I will say that. Lots of KMT superstars there. I mean, you had, of course, Eric Ju, but you also had the gym boss, Chen Chi-han, and the mayor of Taichung. She was also there, Lu Shou-yen, and Zhao Xiaokong, many others. But it seemed very much like just a DPP bashing event or a Lai Ching-te bashing event, just blaming them for the whole recall process. But I kind of wanted to get your insights, right? Some people say, no, this is a civil society initiated recall, and of course then the KMT will say no, this is orchestrated by the KMT. What do you guys think?
Okay,
you mean orchestrated by the DPP? Yeah,
orchestrated by the DPP. Yeah.
Okay, so the KMT talks about there were some calls by DPP politicians who referred to references prior to civic groups actually formally launching these movements. But here's the thing, is that that's not what kicked it off. What really kicked it off was the Bluebird movement over a year ago, when the Pan-Blue Alliance in the legislature started trying to take constitutional powers away from the executive branch and the judicial branch and the Control Yuan, which is another branch of government. And that movement basically turned into a series of civil society movements. And if you look at the dates of the DPP comments and you look at the timeline, it is highly unlikely that basically logistically these civil society groups had to be already in motion. And to be able to pull this together.
Let me jump in here. First of all, it's funded by a billionaire who hates China, Robert Cao. So the only person who really called for it was Ke Jianming. And at that time when it started, I actually spoke with some of the people inside the DPP, and they had not formulated a policy yet. Mm-hmm. They actually function as a real political party. They're behind events. We don't know what to think about this, right? So, and the great thing about having the civil society organizations do it is that they were able to distance themselves.
Yeah.
And the civil society, I think, is shocked, and then you and I have remarked on this many times, shocked everyone with how well organized it is and how potent it has become.
And motivated.
Yeah.
They've been really extremely well motivated.
Yeah. So we're hearing at least 24 KMT lawmakers facing the recall phase 3. Yeah. But, the effort by the KMT to recall DPP lawmakers fell flat on its face. So, I'm kind of curious on that. How do you read this result? Are the public genuinely upset with the KMT behaviour and performance? Or is it just lack of competency on the KMT part to kind of organise and try
These are not mutually exclusive.
Okay.
Well put.
The KMT's obviously been incompetent. The real question is whether it's incompetence or malice. Was it an organized... Because every headquarters has been raided for forging documents in exactly the same way, and a number of officials have confessed, yeah, we did that. So did orders come down? Just get the names of people off the household registration rules. But what it revealed to a lot of us is that KMT doesn't have much of a ground game, which is quite... The local factions don't seem to be mobilizing their people for it. Let's remember that even if the public recalls all these guys, there still have to be elections. And so the public, and you know how the Taiwanese public is, they like to teach people a lesson and then, having taught the lesson, go back to what they had before, right? Mm-hmm. So they could very well vote one way in the recall and then go back to having those 24 KMT guys those 24 seats anyway, filled by the KMT. It's important to separate those votes.
I can throw in some numbers here. There's 24 that have been cleared for stage 3, which is the recall.
Right.
2, there's a grace period to make up for disqualified
And a city mayor.
And
Gao.
And Gao, who was of the TPP. And then there are 5 that they're now in that grace period where enough signatures were disqualified to go back. So it's going to be somewhere between 24 and 31. Just today, this morning, I saw some news that it looks like the last 2 of the 15 KMT anti-DPP recall attempts, it looks like they're folding, which means that they have 0 for 15.
That's so amazing to me.
Yeah. I don't know how much more you want me to go into some of the technical details, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Robert Tsao there, Michael, and he's been pretty, explicit in as regards criticizing the KMT's connections with China.
Oh, yeah.
And he said that basically they're the Trojan horse for the CCP.
He was so great.
And that Beijing wants to use the KMT to annex Taiwan. But this is for foreigners who don't follow Taiwan politics, regularly. This is a very surprising thing to hear, because we thought the KMT and the communists were mortal enemies. What happened? Why is there a flip? What's going on?
Well, we've been writing about this for 2 decades. We watched it unfold in front of us, basically, right? So up until the late 90s, that was the case. And indeed, even today, you can listen to very old KMT people sitting around going, how do we get allied to these communists? We hate these people. But for the most part, it changed around 2000 when they decided to work together to suppress Taiwan independence. And fundamentally, the mainlanders see themselves as Chinese, and so they've decided to work with. Since they can't have Taiwan, they're not going to let the Taiwanese have it. That's pretty much what it is. I've reached the age where I've really come to understand how much spite drives politics.
Okay, very interesting. And of course, the KMT connections with China. I mean, I saw you wrote about Ma Ying-jeou's recent visit to China.
Yeah.
And very interesting how you put the fact that the KMT are conducting diplomacy for Taiwan, but servicing the needs of the PRC. Can you talk a little bit about what you said in that article?
Well, there's a lot of connections between there's not just Ma. Ma's like the really bright public face of this, and it's very tiny. A few dozen exchange students are basically meaningless. There's hundreds of thousands of Taiwanese who've been to China. But there's also, as Donovan has been chronicling and other people, there's close links between the gangs. So, for example, there's gangsters who have operations in both countries, and they used to bring in, when you were allowed to bring in people from China on internship programs, that's how they brought in their gangsters to be trained, right? There's major connections now between the local factions. I'm not going to mention any names. I would like to live to see my Social Security arrive. And between the local factions and the Chinese. The issue for them is how much do we let these guys in, right? So if you might remember the Sunflowers, right? ECFA, then the Subsequent Services Pact, right? The Services Pact was going to turn over services, basically was open up services to China, which meant that the Chinese would come over and own them. They would dominate them. Their gangs are much bigger than ours. So there's all these different kinds of links going on, and the commercial links, and the links between the KMT, the constant visits by politicians. Fu Kunqi's been 3 times this year now? Once to Hong Kong and once more. I'm thinking of last year too. He's been, since he became speaker for he's the KMT whip, right?
Oh, he's the whip.
He's the whip.
Caucus.
That's what
This is the guy from Hualien.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fu Kunqi's the Hualien guy. He's another one who heads up, who's trying to become a national faction. In the traditionally, the KMT has a deal with the local factions, right? Money comes down from the central government. This is how Taiwan was run in the authoritarian heyday. Money would come down. It would go down to the irrigation cooperatives, the agricultural cooperatives, the fishing cooperatives. the local governments, and then the factions would distribute it amongst themselves. And the deal was that money would come down, and you guys would never operate nationally or cross-regionally. You would not form alliances. You would not form networks, because the KMT did not want to be challenged by someone with a local power base, right? That's why all the county governments and city governments are heavily in debt, because they didn't want anyone to have a power base. So debt was one of the ways they managed that. So anyway, as the KMT has declined, that system is broken down, and now at least one of the factions out of Yunlin is sort of metastasizing across Taiwan, and several other. Lai actually named them in a speech. He named all 4 of these factions that are attempting to rise, and that's what Fu Kunqi in Hualien is doing too. Seems like he's trying to position himself as a national operator within this. So there's all kinds of interesting politics going on in the KMT, and I'll turn it over to Donovan, who will talk about that.
So, no, I mean, Mike has summed it up beautifully.
It's very interesting. Also, at this rally on Saturday, I mentioned to, I think he told me his name was Councillor Wu. He's a Taipei city councillor for the KMT. Yeah. I mentioned to him about the KMT's connections with China, and his response to me was, "Oh, what about all those China spies in the DPP? They've had to expel 5 people for spying for China back in May." So I know the government are taking measures to deal with all this espionage and so on, but how big a problem is the spy problem?
Well, let's put it this way. They spy on the DPP because they don't need to spy on the KMT, right? They already own the KMT.
But I mean,
it looks bad.
Yeah. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the DPP's internal security, it was like after something like 8 years, they brought them in, they vetted them once, and then brought them deeper and deeper into the system, and didn't vet them again. I mean, this is embarrassing, and they genuinely deserve a lot of criticism for this. But again, as Mike put it, I mean, they don't need to spy on the KMT.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is that this is a problem across the whole government. It's not just the DPP. How many times has Line been hacked, right? Line, the communications social media platform, right? Line's been hacked many, many times, and yet government officials continue to use it. That Taiwan needs its own secure system. It doesn't have one. There's so many things like that. So you actually have to look at it in that context and not just like, whoa, it's the DPP versus the KMT. That won't work here.
Yeah, I mean, generally you'll find that local government officials will use Line for things like, say, planning to bomb the Houthis.
I see.
Yes. For example, there's someone in jail right now for that. How much money do we need from this dude bribing us? I don't know. Be sure to get receipts.
So one of the other things you mentioned, Donovan, in that article I referred to at the beginning was the increased saber rattling from China. And I suppose some commentators will say this is because of Lai's rhetoric. That we're getting this extra saber rattling. But then you see, a few days ago, a British warship went through the Taiwan Strait, and sure enough, China does a little bit of an escalation. I think they sent 70 warplanes into Taiwan's Adiz after that. So I'm just wondering, where there seems to be increased military tension.
Yeah.
Where do you guys see this going? I mean, how do you interpret that?
Okay, the first thing to keep in mind is that the Chinese Communist Party is going to do what the Chinese Communist Party wants to do. Trying to blame Taiwan for it is, they're the ones doing all the threatening. Taiwan is of no threat to China. Let me give you a good example. When these regular live fire military exercises started, was timed around the visit of then U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. And everybody refers to the Pelosi visit and China's response. That's totally backward. If you actually look at how logistically complicated that first series of live fire exercises is and all the planning that went into it. They've been planning that for months, if not years. They had been waiting for an excuse to pull the trigger. Now, if it hadn't have been Nancy Pelosi visiting, it would have been something else, right? They had a time window when they were going to do this, and they were going to find an excuse to do it, so that people would respond around the world and put the blame elsewhere, right? And so that's basically what they do. And I'm going to pass to Mike because I've stolen so many ideas from Mike on how to explain this.
Well, basically, since the Pelosi visit, there have been a large number of exercises that have been much larger. And yet nothing has been, the media, the international media has not written on them the way it wrote on the Pelosi exercise. And they do this quite frequently. You might remember that when Japan nationalized the Senkaku Islands, right? Then the Chinese had been waiting for something like that. And then because those islands had a weird ownership. They were actually privately owned, but they were owned by a family that had moved to the United States and were American citizens. So they were actually owned by Americans. And so they stole it from us, damn it. So then after that, you have the constant, Chinese activities in those areas. But the thing to look at is not to look at Taiwan or Japan, because those places can always supply an excuse. China shows the exact same behavior towards Philippines, and now also towards South Korea and Malaysia. And Anwar Sadat has basically, turned into Xi Jinping's little bootlicker. Not Anwar Sadat. What's his name?
Anwar Ibrahim.
Ibrahim, thank you. God, I'm so old. I remember Sadat. Anwar.
Wrong
let's
country.
Associate that name. Anwar Ibrahim has basically turned into Xi Jinping's little bootlicker, and yet he's getting the same treatment. So you can see the treatments Taiwan is getting, this gray zoning and pressure and all that, is exactly the same as all these other countries around China's border.
And one thing I'd like to add is fundamental to understanding anything that the CCP does is that their number one priority through their number 10 priority, it is one thing and one thing only. And that is maintaining or ideally extending their control and power within China. And unless you understand that is their primary motivation for what they do. They don't care about their own people. This is about their own rule, their own regime. And so a lot of people ask about, will China attack Taiwan? And I say the answer is very simple. When the CCP and Xi Jinping calculates that the risk to maintaining their power domestically and the potential gains in domestic power are higher than the risks, then they'll attack. Now, the hard part is, how do they make that calculation? And that's a really difficult question to answer.
And I guess it's just as difficult as in the coming months, in that, again, one of your recent articles, the amount of uncertainty that lies ahead in the coming months with elections, with the result of the tariffs, the US tariffs outcome in the negotiation, China's economic uncertainty, what happens in Zhongnanhai, as you alluded to. So many variables. It's an incredibly fraught time.
Well, you notice we both have gray hair.
From thinking about this.
In fact, I lost mine.
But opportunities, it's interesting what you said in one of the recent articles, Donovan, in that you said there's opportunities for any one of the Taiwan parties to kind of leap ahead here or take advantage of the situation, which of course will also affect the opportunities for the CCP, depending on how the outcome is, right? Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things at play there in terms of how one or two of the parties could get ahead?
Okay, so it really kind of depends on how certain things play out. So, for example, if the Trump tariffs do come in and bite, and they would hit Taiwan at 32%, which is significantly higher than Japan and South Korea, which would be particularly brutal for Taiwan. Then the opposition will blame this on the ruling party, right? And there, because it's easy to throw rocks when you're in the opposition. Now, I doubt that any government, no matter what party was in power, would have much luck at negotiating with the Trump administration right now, just simply because of where, Taiwan's position. But, that, for example, could help the KMT. And I'll think that they'd take one of two options. One, I think that on certain wings of the party will go more extreme, and they've been traditionally more America skeptic and pro-China, and they will kind of their propaganda messaging will merge with CCP's. But I think at the very top level, like Eric Zhu, I think that he'll talk about, and he's used this line before, the need for Taiwan to balance between Washington and Beijing. Which
separates Taiwan from Washington, which is the whole goal of that rhetoric.
Right. And so, then they would try and portray themselves as, we would have had a more balanced, wise, rational approach.
Oh, yes, the rational party.
Sophisticated. I'm sorry, I'm referring to some of Michael.
I've read the article.
He's used. It's that the KMT uses some of these terms kind of repeatedly and repetitively. So, yeah.
Do you think there could be several outcomes to this grand recall? Do you think there's any opportunity there for a likelihood where, I see, President Lai invited the KMT and the TPP for a chat about national security recently, but both of them turned him down. Yeah. Are there any opportunities ahead in terms of like a potential outcome from the grand recall, for example, where it might encourage the parties to talk or have a better relationship, better dialogue, or is that just like is that fantasizing? Right.
I think. Let me jump in here for a second, Donovan. I think one of the things you have to remember is that the things that they're doing right now, stopping government bodies from functioning by not approving people, trying to kill the sub-program, calling Lai a Nazi, and so on and so on. These are all things that were used against Chen Shui-bian. The exact same things were done. When the KMT is out of power and when the KMT has the power, and the president is from the DPP, they follow this pattern, right? So they won't cooperate because they will never cooperate with a pro-Taiwan party. One outcome you might see is if it looks bad. The recalls are all. If a lot of recalls go, there's 30, and then they start doing the elections, and the internal polls say the public is volcanic and they hate the KMT. They might try to do. They might try to have a vote of confidence in the premier. They also talked about that with Chen Shui-bian several times. And remember, they tried 3 recalls against Chen Shui-bian too, all of which failed because the recalls are very stringent for the president.
Yeah.
So they will go back to this playbook. They will then say, let's recall the premier. Then if they recall the premier, the president can dismiss the legislature. Then that would really screw things up. Mm-hmm. That might cause a constitutional crisis. Even the recall elections might cause a constitutional crisis. So there's actually a lot on the line as far as Taiwan governments is here. And I think that's part of the KMT plan too. Because remember, they win if the government doesn't work, and they win if they win. So that DPP only wins if we have a functional democracy and they're in power.
Yeah. If the DPP though have a successful outcome from this recall, does that calm everything down and allow the government to move forward in a more democratic fashion as we would expect?
Yeah, right into that tariff wall.
Into the tariff wall.
I don't know if I want to be in power when those tariffs drop in late July. Oh my God! At least if the KMT is in charge of the legislature, Lai can just yell at them. Mm-hmm. But Taiwan has no good alternatives at the moment, and I've been starting to point this out in my columns as if you look at demographics, where are we going to be in 10 years, even 5 years, right? So I don't know what the constant
your point, Michael, is that birth rates in Taiwan are
we were talking about this. Birth rates are plummeting. This year, there will be less than 100,000 people born in an island of 23 million people whose population is falling. In 75 years, we will lose 90% of our people, even if the birth rate doesn't continue to fall. But it will. So, but in the near term, what that means is they are going to be extremely short, and some professions that are desperately needed, like construction, are going to have no people. And the well of migrant workers is about to dry up because they are also suffering from the same issues.
Other neighboring countries,
all of the neighboring
Just
countries
delayed,
have falling birth rates as well.
I see.
And if you look at Thailand now, I think is at 1.1 for the whole country, or 1.2. And in Bangkok, what's a baby? I don't know. They're not having them, right? All of did you read the thing I wrote about population density and the development model?
No, I did read that one. Yeah.
In the East Asian democracies, the East Asian states, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, to Singapore, China, they all have the same pattern. You have the export economy, and it's bright and shiny and produces electronics and all kind of great stuff the world needs, right? It's a miracle. It explodes up. Yay! The flip side of that is a domestic economy where you've suppressed consumption and you've suppressed workers' wages. And so the only viable alternative for investment is land and land development. And that becomes, every country does it in a different way, but they all do the same thing. They put up apartment buildings. And apartment buildings, this densification, causes birth rates to plummet. So, Tokyo is basically a necropolis. Everyone, is like, wow, it's so convenient, so great. Urban living, Tokyo, number one. Yeah, it's got a TFR of 0.93. If it's so great, nobody wants to have babies. Why? So basically Tokyo is the place where the population of Japan goes to die. And we're doing the same thing here in Taiwan. So all of this political stuff that we're going through, the recalls, the tariffs, all this constant churn of attention-grabbing things means that the really deep problems aren't getting solved.
Now, of course, the positive side to that is that soon the bottom's going to fall out on all your Hello Kitty collectibles. So if you've been waiting to get that perfect Hello Kitty collectible, I think the time's coming.
Well, that's a good positive note to end on. So, Courtney Donovan Smith, thank you very much for chatting with us, and Michael Turton, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
It's great to be here.
That's Courtney Donovan Smith, who is a staff columnist for the Taipei Times and whose regular column, Donovan's Deep Dives, shares in-depth analysis on everything about Taiwan's political scene and geopolitics. Michael Turton is also a contributing columnist for the Taipei Times. His column is called Notes from Central Taiwan, and it provides incisive commentary informed by 3 decades of living in and writing about his adoptive country. My sincere thanks to both Michael and Donovan for speaking with me on June 24th last and for sharing their valuable insights with us on Perspectives with Neilo. We've linked some recent articles from both Donovan and Michael in the Dive Deeper section of our blog, as well as updates on all of the topics discussed in this episode, including the latest on the US tariffs on Taiwan and analysis on the outcome of the July 26th vote on Taiwan's Great Recall. You can find it all at pwneilo.com. Feel free to also check out our more than 70 past episodes, including our recent mini-series on Taiwan's Great Recall. You can find our past episodes at pwneilo.com or by searching for Perspectives with Neilo wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to hit that subscribe or follow button so you don't miss out on our future episodes. But that's where we leave it for now. As always, thank you for listening, and until the next time, from Taichung, Taiwan, 再见.